Okay, so I've been trying to film this with my iPad and Apple Pencil, and it's just not working. So I'm going to try to do it on the screen here. Um, okay, so today's lesson, we were talking about comparing fractions. So remember, we talked about if you or someone you know really likes chocolate and you would like to have the most amount of chocolate possible, would you want 5/12 of that chocolate bar or 3/4 of that chocolate bar? And remember, we talked about that at the end of the lesson after we've learned a couple strategies. So we're going to hang on to that information. We will revisit that at the end of our lesson. Okay. So in the meantime, in our notebook, what we had started was we wrote the story problem. No, sorry, we did not write the story problem. We just needed the fractions, right? So the story problem reads, Nate ran 4/5 of a mile. Addie ran 3/5 of a mile. Who ran farther? Or did they run the same distance? Be prepared to justify your answer. So again, you don't want to rewrite that whole thing on in your notes. We just need 4/5 and 3/5. And we talked about how can you justify your answer? Well, that would be one of two ways. You could show a fraction circle or compared to another fraction circle, or you could show it on the number line. Okay, so let's see what those might look like. If you chose to do the fraction circles, you can see how the circle on the left has 4 out of the 5 pieces covering it versus the one on the right where there's just 3 pieces covering the whole. So you can tell based on the pieces covering it that 4/5 is more than 3/5. Okay? If you use the number line in the back of your math journal maybe, and we zoomed in on it, it would look like this. Okay? And we know since the denominators are 5s that for this to be a whole, the other way to write that as a fraction would be 5/5, right? So this one right before it would be 4/5, and then the number before 4 would be 3/5. So since we have 4 that's further along the number line, closer to the whole, we know that 4/5 is more than 3/5. And to write it as a number model, it would look like that. Okay? Or you can do 3/5 is less than 4/5. That would work too. Okay? Now, there's that number line from the back of your book that we talked about. If we were using that, using the same problem with Nate and Addie running, we would find the 4/5, the 3/5, and again, with the 4/5 being the furthest to the right, closest to the whole 5/5, we know that this 4/5 is more than 3/5. Okay, so I just showed you 3 different things. Actually, the 2 number lines are the same. It's just on the one before it's zoomed in, right? It's this whole thing but zoomed in. Okay, so 4/5 is more than 3/5. All right, now the next problem in your notebook. We talked about Evan at a school picnic saw a group of 3 friends getting ready to share a large sandwich. 2 other friends were sharing another sandwich that was the same size. Both groups invited Evan to join them. Which group should he join if he wants to get the most to eat? Okay, so remember when we were we don't want to rewrite this whole story into the notes. We won't have time to do that. So we've got to think about what are the fractions here? Well, we know that they're talking about Evan and 3 friends. So if there's already 3 people sharing that sandwich and now Evan joins, that's actually going to be divided among 4 people. So that would be 1/4 of the sandwich. Okay, so there's one option. Second option are these 2 friends plus Evan. So if 2 people were sharing it and now Evan joins, that would be Evan would be sharing 1/3 of that sandwich. So now this is our information. Which one's more, 1/4 or 1/3? Down here it says prove by drawing a picture or showing your answer on a number line. So let's look at what that would look like. Here's your picture. This is the one orange piece out of 3, 1/3, and we have one yellow piece out of the 4, which is 1/4. So you can tell that 1/3 is more than 1/4, so Evan should join the group of 2 friends. If you're using the number line, zoomed in, this is what it would look like. We have 1/3 here, 1/4 here. If we drew that straight line down, we would see that 1/3 is more than 1/4. So again, 1/4 is more than 1/3. Okay, and if we and these are mixed up there, those numbers, so we're just going to skip that part. If we want to look at our number line from the back of the book, we would find our first fraction of 1/3, our second fraction 1/4. Okay, which number is closer to the right or to the whole? And that is not by much, but 1/3. He would get a little bit more in that group. So back to our question. Oops, I put this light in there a second time. Back to the question was, which group should he join? And it would be the group with 2 friends. He would make the 3rd one. So what we're doing today and what we talked about in our lesson is we're comparing 2 fractions. Okay, and that's really it. And we look at the numerators to see which one's bigger, but we have to make sure that the denominator is common or the same. Okay, and then we're going to talk about real briefly today using the benchmark of a half fraction. Now we're going to talk about that a lot more tomorrow. Okay, but before we do the move on, let's talk about why creating common denominators needs to be something that we do and why it's so important. So we looked at these 2 pizzas, right? We had a large pizza and we had a small pizza. And if we had a half of each, could we say that those are equal? I mean, they're both showing a half of a pizza. And of course, we know we cannot because the half of the large is way more pizza than the half of that small pizza. So actually, this is going to be not equal, right? Okay, so we can't compare these two because we're not comparing the same thing. So in order to be able to compare the exact same thing, we have to have common denominators. It has to be divided equally. Okay, so next story problem in your notebook. Okay, again, don't write this whole thing down. We just need the fractions. Tobias and Harriet are siblings. Their parents gave each of them the same allowance. Tobias spent 2/5 of his money at a movie. Harriet spent 6/10 of her money at the book fair. Who spent less, or did they spend the same amount? Okay, again, we're going to prove this by using either circle fractions or number lines. So we need to know our fractions, 2/5 and 6/10. Okay, so here we go, 2/5, 6/10. I prefer the number line, guys. I just think it's way faster and way easier. So if you have it, definitely use it, okay? We have 2/5 versus 6/10. Now, careful, this story problem's not asking about who has more or closer to the whole. It wants to know less, which now we're looking at which number comes closer to 0. Okay, and if we look at that, 2/5 is the number that's furthest to the left. So 2/5 is going to be less than 6/10. Okay, and that's how it would look if you wrote that out. 2/5 is less than 6/10. Okay, so we got to go back and remind ourselves, what was the question actually asking us? Who spent less? The answer to that question was Tobias. Okay, and then we did this one real quickly, and I'm just going to breeze through this because we are going to talk so much more about this tomorrow. Okay, but this is one more strategy that some of you might like, and it's comparing your fractions to a half to help you kind of identify quickly which one's more. So we had Deanna and Avery are reading the book Mrs. Frobick assigned to the class. Deanna has read 5/6 of it, and Avery has read 4/12. Who has read more? Or have they read the same amount? Okay, so let's think about, we know what a half looks like, okay? And if we're going to look at 4/12, and we wanted to find out what's half of 12, well, that would be 6/12, right? And since the 4 is less than that 6/12, then we know that 4/12 has to be less than half because 6/12 is the same thing as 1/2, right? Because 12 is twice as much as 6. Okay, so that's less. If we took the 5/6, we'd have to figure out what half of 6 would be. Well, half of 6 is 3. Now we're going to look at our numerators. 5 is more than 3, so 5/6 must be more than half, or 3/6, right? So this is more. So who is reading more? Well, that's the question, right? And we have 5/6, 4/12. Obviously, 5/6 is the closest one to the whole. So who is reading more? Deanna is the answer. Okay. So back to that question, would you rather have 5/12 or 3/4? Well, if you look at that half again, half of the 12s is 6/12. So 5/12 is going to be less than that. Half of your fourths is going to be 2/4. 3/4 is more than 2/4. So 3/4 would be the bigger number. If you wanted to have more chocolate, you would want 3/4 of it. So Math Journal 83 is what we worked on together in class. Okay. And your home links tonight is page, well, it's home link lesson 3.6. Okay. And so good luck on that. If we have any questions, we can talk about it tomorrow during our Zoom. Thanks, guys.